Okay, I'm back. Now can you hear me? Please let me know in the chat. I may have done something very dumb. So, yes, yay, thank you, Muna. Yay, yay, yay. Okay, so I did something very dumb, and I'm just telling you this so when you do stuff like this, you'll know everybody does this. So when in this particular system, when I come on, I have to enable the webcam and the microphone. And I have a feeling I just enabled the webcam and I didn't enable the microphone. So it was a dumb mistake, but we're here. You can all hear me. That is great. Okay, let me go get the PowerPoint. And so I'm assuming you can all see this. All right, you can see this. I can see this. So we are all good to go. All right, here we go. So we're going to be talking about why clients don't know they're stressed. And just, there's a certain psychological aspect to stress that people don't really understand, and they don't necessarily connect it to physical realities that they're experiencing, whether it's health issues they have or symptoms that they have. And it can make it difficult for you as the practitioner to try and figure out exactly, how to convince them. Whoops, come back here. To convince them to, I'm just going to turn my webcam off there, to make some changes, both from supporting their body physically because of stress and, of course, doing something about the stress as well. All right, so before we get started, if you're looking for the PDF slides, if you're looking for the references, if you want to do the quiz for upgrading hours, I have posted them all on the website. So if you go to the website, then look in the right-hand column for this ad that says the Inspired Learning Hub. Click on that, and you'll see the one for this particular webinar, and you just click on that, and you'll find the PDF slides and all the information that you need. All right, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. All right, so why don't clients think they're stressed? Well, it's all about the definition. So for most people, when they think of stress, this is what they think. They think, they feel frustrated or angry or, want to pull their hair out, and it has to do with, health issues or, money problems or, things that are going on, and they just feel overwhelmed. And that's what most people think stress means. And then that's what when they answer those questions on your intake forms that say, how stressed are you? This is why you may see somebody who you think really is having adrenal issues or stress related issues, because you can see from the symptoms they have or health conditions that they have that there's a stress component often, and yet they don't seem to feel they're stressed at all. So let me ask you this. Does this sound familiar? And you can type in the chat for this if it does. You can't tell the difference between having energy or being anxious. Okay, so this is a real scenario for me. About 2 weeks ago, most of the time I don't sleep well because I'm under a lot of stress. And I don't sleep well. When I say I don't sleep well, I don't mean I don't get 8 hours, but I have to work hard at it. I usually have to have a nap in the afternoon to get the full amount of sleep that I need. And but anyway, a couple of weeks ago, 2 nights in a row, I woke up and I felt like rested. I thought, oh my goodness, is this what rested feels like? I actually want to get up. And then it occurred to me that perhaps I wasn't all that rested. I would maybe just had a little more cortisol pumping because I was actually anxious. And I couldn't tell the difference of whether I was anxious or I was just feeling good, which is going to be very confusing if that happens to you or it's happening to a client. Like, how do you convince them that they're experiencing stress if they just think they're experiencing energy? So I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Another scenario is despite eating well, and you may have seen this with yourself or with clients, they really do eat well. They do give their body plenty of nutrition. But their symptoms seem to get worse, whatever their health condition may be. Symptoms seem to get worse for no reason. So they have like good days and bad days where, some days their muscles ache a lot or their joints ache a lot, or they have headaches or whatever. And then other days they feel much, much better. And you can't tie it to anything because they're pretty consistent in everything they do, from their lifestyle to their eating habits to even the way they sleep, whatever. So that's something I've seen frequently. I've experienced it myself as well, but I see it a lot with people. And then this is another one, and again, I've experienced this, and you may have. You're very tired at night, which is a good thing because that means your cortisol levels have dropped, and you just, you're so tired, you just want to crawl into bed and crash. And then you get there, and your mind keeps you awake while you think about things that are completely unimportant, like your favorite TV show, or, what you were just thinking about before you went to bed, or anything you were doing before you go to bed. Nothingness. You aren't worrying about something that's, a problem. You're not thinking in those terms. You're just thinking about nothingness, and you're not falling asleep. So I don't know if anybody has experienced that. I'm just going to check in the chat. So does that resonate with anyone? You can just tell me if it does, because these are the kind of scenarios that, so Karen's saying yes, these are the kind of scenarios that resonate with people. Marianne says, I've got it all. Okay, well, the good news is you're normal. Yay, we all have something in common. But these are all, Julia says, no, but my husband does. So again, these are all signs of stress. And it's not necessarily acute stress. And we're going to talk about that. And Sherry says, only when I am stressed. Linda says, I have this problem, particularly thinking of nothing and not being able to get to sleep. Yeah, that's the most frustrating. So yeah, so we can see that there are a lot of circumstances where it really isn't tied to the direct event that may be causing us stress, and therefore a lot of us may not realize that that's what we're experiencing. Okay, so this is another one, and this is a little more complex, and we'll talk about this at the very end of the presentation. You dream of a different life. So this could be anything from you don't like your job and you want to be doing something different, to you don't like your life and it's not what you had hoped it would be when you were younger, to just not having enough time to do the things you really enjoy and that you have passion for, or not liking where you live and you want to live somewhere else, or not having time to do, to travel and to do things that you want to do. Like there's a lot of that in us where we get into a routine of life, and it's not that our life is necessarily bad. It can be. So this can fall into that category, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. But whatever you're doing just doesn't work for you. It isn't working for you. And what a lot of people don't understand is that this can often manifest in physical symptoms. It's almost like, your body starts to fight you because you won't do what you're supposed to be doing that's going to make you happy. And that's a very psycho-spiritual thing. And as I said, I'm going to leave that to the very end because it's something to think about. But there's a lot of people in this position where they really want to be doing one type of work, or live a life in a certain way, or be living in a certain, part of the world, or, pursuing projects that really, really interest them, work on hobbies that they love, spend more time with people that they really care about that they're not getting a chance to do, have a different job. Like there's so much of that plays into how stress manifests with us physically. But this is a big one that people cannot make a connection to because they wouldn't put A with B. So that's a much bigger conversation. All right. So stress, as you know, is a physiological process, but it feels emotional. And it can involve every area of the body because stress is connected to our fight or flight response. It means that this scenario of stress is connected to the immune system, it's connected to the nervous system, it's connected to the intestinal system, the digestive system, the heart, the lungs, the liver, blood sugar, you name it, it's all connected. So this means that stress can potentially be involved with every physical symptom or health issue you might have. It can produce multiple symptoms, so that makes it more confusing as well. And this is why it's often hard to connect the symptoms to the stress, because it's feeling emotional, and yet there's so much going on physically that we have trouble putting the two together unless we really know and are like, because there's acute stress and then there's chronic stress. So usually with acute stress, we can make the connection because it's fresh in our minds. But when it's chronic stress, sometimes we lose touch with the fact that we're actually more physically involved with, trying to get through our daily life than we might actually be able to acknowledge. So stress and how it manifests to us has more to do with how people perceive it and what they think it means. And this is why you may have trouble getting them to admit that they're stressed. So in terms of clients, they expect to feel negatively when they are stressed. They don't actually understand this physiological response that is really what stress is. So they always associate it with sort of a negative situation. They're going to be angry, or they're going to be frustrated or confused or unhappy or crying, or have mood swings. That's what they associate with stress. But just being busy can make you stressed. And this is not a busy that feels bad. So it can be something that you're happy to be busy doing because you really want to do what you're doing, but you're busy. And busy that feels good is physiologically the same as busy that is bad, because you have to come up with more energy to get things done. You are pushing yourself. There are timelines, and that's all it takes, because this is a physiological experience, right? So you need to pump more cortisol if you're going to have the energy to get through all the things you have to get through when you're busy. And it can feel emotional, especially when things are bad, but that's not the only circumstance in which you could increase cortisol. So it's not all about being bad. So just having mental exertion increases your cortisol levels. And they did a study and looked at people who sit in front of a computer all day, and they basically figured out that even though they're sitting, their mental exertion is causing them to be extremely fatigued, as well as they might as well have been doing something physical. It's the same. It doesn't play out any differently in the physical body. And of course, obviously, physical exertion will do this too, because if you have to exert yourself more physically than your normal standing, walking, whatever, you're going to raise cortisol levels. And then doing too many things in a short period of time also increases cortisol levels, because that's, you've got timelines. You've got to go here, then then by this time you've got to be over there, and then you've got to pick this up, and that alone can raise your cortisol levels. And in that circumstance, you might also possibly have more adrenaline as well, because if you're running late, or you're afraid you're going to be late to a certain appointment or something like that, the adrenaline starts pumping. And all of these things and all of these activities, you could be having the time of your life. This isn't necessarily you're doing things you don't want to do. You may be doing things you don't want to do, or you may be doing some things you want to do, and some things you don't want to do. I know I feel even more pressure when there's something I really want to do, and my timeline is so short that stuff I don't want to do might interfere with what I do want to do. So that can be even worse. So it doesn't really matter what you're doing. It's what is the body perceiving that it needs to adjust to in order for you to have the ability to do what you're trying to do. So to have the energy, to have the strength, to have the mental focus. And all of these require you to have more cortisol to make that happen. So of course, when we are secreting a lot of cortisol, we are in fight or flight. And we have to really think about what that means and what this allows a person to do. So when you're in fight or flight, you are more alert than you actually are. You have more energy than a person would have if they weren't in fight or flight. And if the person is tired and lacking energy, they have to have a version of fight or flight to get through the day. And that is probably one of the biggest things that I see, is that there are people who are tired, but they seem to have enough energy, and they don't understand that what they're living on is higher cortisol to give them that energy throughout the day, not realizing that it's causing other symptoms and situations going on in their body physically as well as emotionally, because there's always an emotional component to it as well. And they don't realize that they don't actually have the energy. Cortisol is giving them extra energy that they wouldn't typically have. And I think this is going on for a lot of people in a lot of circumstances. And in this circumstance, because normally in true fight or flight, when you are in danger, you first secrete a short amount of not a short amount, a large amount of adrenaline for a short amount of time. So just seconds, you are secreting adrenaline, and then you switch to high cortisol until you're out of danger. So, but in this scenario, you may just be doing high cortisol without the adrenaline, without some kind of timeline or deadline that is approaching that you might not make, or something like that. The adrenaline often doesn't pump for most people in most circumstances. All right. And of course, the longer the day continues, the higher the cortisol levels will be. So if you have a longer day versus a normal day, you will continue to pump the higher cortisol. And the longer the mind is active, the longer the cortisol lasts. But if it's pleasant or exciting, then clients aren't going to necessarily see this as stress. So again, you're not going to get a true picture without sort of asking them how their day flows and what they do all day, and maybe even get them to write down what they've done in the day before. Is probably going to be the best way for you to tell what they could possibly be going through from a stress perspective, other than depending on their interpretation of stress. Now, they've also done studies where they've found that as you continue in this pattern, where you're running around like crazy and you're pumping a lot of cortisol, when you hit your later life, you may have insomnia or have trouble sleeping. And if you know a lot of elderly people, a lot of them have trouble sleeping. They sleep for short hours. They don't sleep through the night. And this is one of the reasons why, is because their system has gotten used to operating on a certain level, and they just don't recuperate and go back to normal once they retire and are no longer needing to operate this way. And it does affect the quality of their sleep. And of course, when you're older, if ever you wanted to have good sleep, that's when you want to have it, because you need to be repairing as best you can repair to function well as an older person. So you already don't have maybe the optimal repair systems in place because you're older, and now you're not even maximizing what you can do because you don't get enough sleep. All right, so the physical response, and we were talking about this in a meeting for some of the members of the people who've taken my programs. We were talking about this because one of the things I see with clients, and I see it very commonly, they're trying to lose weight. They exercise like crazy. They don't overeat. They even may eat well, and yet they can't lose fat. And one of the reasons is because they're in such a strenuous state, and they're not really fueling their body appropriately for the strenuous state they're in because they exercise so much. They are burning sugar, not fat. So when you do excessive amounts of weight training, high intensity aerobics, you're burning sugar, not fat. And of course, because that's what you do when you're in fight or flight. You have more weight, like you can lift more weight, you can run faster, you do have more aerobic capacity. So when you do this high intensity aerobics or you're doing a lot of weightlifting, you're doing what you're able to do when you're in fight or flight. So you burn sugar, not fat. And of course, when we are stressed, we also burn sugar, not fat. So even when we're, stressing over a deadline at work and we're having high cortisol, we're burning sugar, not fat. And it's probably one of the biggest changes between us and our ancestors who did a lot of low intensity physical work on a daily basis. They were fat burners and we are sugar burners. And this makes sense because, we're in fight or flight to protect us from danger. So we need quick energy, and that's going to come from glucose. It takes more time to convert fat to glucose to give us energy. So the body's looking for straight glucose. Now, of course, I know you all know this, that without a steady supply of glucose, blood sugar drops as it is burned. And now your blood sugar is low, and the body needs to bring it back up. So this is where most people fall into the habit of either using stimulants like caffeine or nicotine, or alcohol or sugar, something quick to bring their blood sugar back up. If you do none of those things, the adrenals is going to do it anyway. So when you don't bring blood sugar back up, assuming you don't have any health issue with regard to that, what'll happen is your adrenals will secrete adrenaline to tell the liver to convert glycogen to glucose and bring your blood sugar back up. So one way or another, that blood sugar is coming back up, and it always comes back up high because whether it's the sugar or the stimulants or the adrenals, because adrenaline is quite powerful, it's coming up high. And of course, now that it's high, you're going to release a high amount of insulin, which is going to take it back down low. And now you're going through this cycle throughout the day where you're going high, low, high, low. And so one of the things I look for when I'm looking at a client's food journal is where do they have and what do they have in between meals? So am I seeing the coffee, at 4 o'clock, maybe it's somebody who works in construction or something and they finish at 4 o'clock and they head for a beer. Looking for something sweet after a meal is a really telltale sign that their blood sugar was low before the meal. And when they eat the meal, it takes too long to digest, so it doesn't bring up the blood sugar fast enough. So now they still have the desire to have something bring up the blood sugar, and they usually crave something sweet, or maybe they want more alcohol or a coffee or something like that after a meal. So there's lots of telltale signs that you can look for to see this pattern. And what's really important about this pattern is if you see it, I don't care what they say about them being stressed. Their adrenals and the way they are conducting their themselves through the day, they're burning sugar, not fat. That means they're in fight or flight. That means they are stressed. So if they show signs of dysglycemia, as we call it, then this is a sign that their adrenals are in play. And as a result, they may be more stressed than they're aware of. And I will also tell you that the coffee drinkers in particular are the least likely to recognize the low, what they feel like when they're low. So they may not acknowledge that they're tired because they reach for that coffee so fast. It's such an automatic thing. They're the hardest ones to sort of try and get them to see that, sure, first they feel great, then they feel not so great, then they feel great again, then they feel not. So they're very hard. Caffeine is very good at doing that. Okay. So in terms of reaction to stress, many assume that the reaction to too much stress is something aggressive or anger or something negative. But researchers have found that what most people do when they're in fight or flight is something they call tend and befriend. And it used to be thought that only women did this, and now researchers have found that men do it as well. So basically what tend and befriend is that you tend to want to protect, say, loved ones or a circumstance that you're in, so you're going to tend to it, or you're going to seek help from others or protection from others, which is the befriend. So in other words, you're running towards some circumstance that is of comfort, as opposed to reacting with aggression or anger. So you're more likely to be fleeing as opposed to fighting. And this is another reason why stress may not be apparent to the client, because they're not necessarily having this expected negative reaction. Now, again, a little this is a review for you. And before I get into this, I just want to see that you're all doing well. Oh, good, you're all doing well. Melody saying, all my clients' friends too have insomnia. I think between stress and lack of sleep, if we could resolve those two, we would have most people's health issues under control. I think they are so significant that it's something we need to pay a lot of attention to. All right, so let's just a little bit of function here, because once I get through this, I'm going to tell you some new information. So the adrenal cortex, of course, is where we produce cortisol, and we also produce the hormone aldosterone, and it's the outer part of the adrenals. And this is the role of cortisol. It's essential for the maintenance of homeostasis and maintaining life. It helps regulate blood sugar, immune response, anti-inflammatory response, blood pressure, heart, muscle contractions, nervous system function, fat, protein, and carbohydrate metabolism, and it keeps you awake. So you can see under normal circumstances with normal amounts of cortisol, this is very beneficial, but you could also see, because of the systems involved, that when you have too much of it, you could be having too much of these things going on, which can cause a lot of symptoms and eventually health conditions. The adrenal cortex also makes aldosterone, which plays a central role regulating blood pressure, and it also helps with the conservation of sodium and potassium from the kidneys. So again, it's not really related to stress, but it's just good to know that that's where it's made. And then the adrenal medulla is where what they call non-essential hormones such as adrenaline and noradrenaline are produced. So remember that adrenaline is considered a non-essential hormone, because quite frankly, if you're never in danger, why would you ever need adrenaline? You really don't, right? And so these hormones from the adrenal medulla are released after the sympathetic nervous system is stimulating during times of stress. So you're only going to see those ones in play when you've gone through a circumstance of stress and are put into fight or flight. All right, so this brings us to the HPA axis, which I always think is good to review, because if we understand this, then we understand why stress has so much control over our physical body. So the hypothalamus, and this is about how we end up having cortisol and how long we have cortisol. So the hypothalamus releases a corticotropin-releasing hormone, which then signals the pituitary to release ACTH, or adrenal corticotropin hormone. And then the adrenals are stimulated by ACTH to produce glucocorticoids such as cortisol and cortisone. Cortisone is our anti-inflammatory hormone. Then cortisol, in turn, suppresses the function of the hypothalamus and the pituitary in order to suppress cortisol or stop the production of it. So basically, this is what we go through every day, that the hypothalamus tells the pituitary to tell the adrenals to start making cortisol. And then when we need to drop our cortisol levels, the adrenals then tell the hypothalamus to tell the pituitary to tell the adrenals to stop making cortisol. So in other words, the adrenals determine whether or not you stop making cortisol. This is really important when you're trying to go to sleep at night. And if this doesn't happen, then you stay awake. And this is a common situation for people to not really understand that the adrenals are basically ruling the roost. And as long as they're ruling the roost, they're affecting a lot of other functions as you continue to produce cortisol either when you shouldn't, or high amounts of cortisol when you should only be secreting normal amounts of cortisol. So either situation is not good. There's more cortisol in the system than there's supposed to be. All right, so in terms of cortisol production, there's now a different perspective. So when you talk to people who are adrenal experts, they talk about adrenal fatigue, and what that's all about. And they really, this is relatively new information, and I hate to say this, but it goes into a little bit of genetics. Not that I'm a genetic expert, but it is involving genetics, and then I'll explain why this is a significant thing. But it really, there's a lot more to cortisol production than just the adrenals. It's not just about the adrenals. So there's a gene that produces cortisol that sits in one of the most complex regions of the human genome, and this region is known as RCCX. And this particular region is really prone to genetic instability and great variability. So in other words, when you have genetic instability, it means that it can vary greatly as to how it's expressed from person to person. And the variability, because remember with genes, it's all about gene expression, not specifically the genes. So there's a lot of influences as to how genes express themselves, which means the results per person can be even more variable. Now, this particular genetic region is associated with innate immune signaling, synaptic development, the stress response, of course, and the integrity of the extracellular matrix. So some pretty important functions. And all of these are connected to a number of diseases. So again, this goes back to what we know about cortisol and a lot of the roles that it has. But this RCCX is also a type of gene region known as copy number variation, or CNV. And when you have CNVs, you can lead to a lot of genomic instabilities of varying types. And again, they've linked this to many different diseases. And to help you understand that a little better, you can't test for this. You can't test RCCX. You can't test for CNVs. If you go through a company like 23andMe or Nutrigenomics, they test for something that are known as SNPs, SNPs. And basically, an SNP is a single gene with a slight variation. So if you do nutrigenomics testing and they find what they call the SNP for caffeine, it means that you fall into that percentage of the population that really shouldn't have a lot of caffeine, because it puts you at higher risk for heart disease, whereas people who don't have that genetic SNP, it doesn't. And this is what all this genetic testing is about through nutrigenomics and 23andMe and things like that. But they're only looking for a single gene. When we're looking at this is a bunch of genes together in a complex, and it makes it, well, there is no test for it right now to sort of say why one person is one way and another person is another. So it makes it very, very complicated, which is kind of the only reason I put this in here. But also through this research, they found that cortisol is not just produced in the adrenal cortex. It's also produced in the central nervous system and the liver. So this, plus the genetic complexity of the production of cortisol, plus the emotional complexity due to the brain connection and the HPA axis and the central nervous system involvement, it's really going to be difficult to see consistency in symptoms from person to person. So even though most of us could probably rhyme off a number of symptoms someone might have as a result of stress, we can't know the totality of it with a given person. There may be things we don't connect to stress that are connected to stress. So from that perspective, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is perhaps we shouldn't just worry about it. What might be connected to stress, and routinely just have them support their body through stress, and both with lifestyle and food and supplements and things like that. Like, we should just do it, because we can't really know for sure if something that they are experiencing has a stress connection and we're just missing it. All right, so I'm going to just go through a few studies that I came across, which I found were kind of interesting because they add to the stress picture. So I don't think it's surprising if I tell you stress increases aging, but they did actually look at there's a people study, and it was 91 patients with recurrent depression, and they compared them to 40 151 healthy controls. Now, chronic stress is associated with shorter telomeres. And they found this in both groups. And for those of you who may not be familiar with what a telomere is, and this is one of the biggest areas of interest for aging and why we age that's going right now. So telomeres are little tips that are on the end of chromosomes, and they shorten every time a chromosome duplicates itself. And if the telomere completely disappears, then the chromosome can no longer, duplicate itself. So it has been linked to the development of degenerative conditions and things like that that are associated with aging. It used to be, they said, that the telomeres would only have, or the chromosome only had so many divisions and it couldn't be maintained. They've since revised that, and we now know there's an enzyme called telomerase that actually helps you maintain your telomeres. So they've done studies where they've looked at people, measured their cortisol levels throughout the day, and they have found that people who have high cortisol levels when they have been working all day, their telomerase enzyme is turned off. So in other words, they can't, or their body's not at that amount of time that they're stressed, they're not maintaining their telomeres. But when they come home, say, for example, from work, and if they engaged in yoga or meditation or qigong or tai chi, they've studied all of this, that actually switches the telomerase enzyme on. So this is why this is of interest to us, because if telomeres are involved with our chromosomes and how our chromosomes can maintain themselves, obviously we want to maintain our telomeres. And if stress is interfering with that process, and we're doing this over the course of our lifetime, this can have serious implications in terms of how stress can cause us to have degenerative conditions. So what they found in this particular study is that those who are depressed had shorter telomere length than the controls. And the reason they gave was that, and this is known to be true, that depressed people have disturbed cortisol regulation in comparison to healthy people. So in other words, one of the issues that can occur as a result of chronic stress is depression. It doesn't occur in all people, but it occurs in a lot of people. And again, so this is another symptom that you might not link to stress if you can't pinpoint the stress directly, but there could be something going on with the way their cortisol is manufactured, and as a result is playing a role in not only their depression, but also how they are aging. And so this just underscores the role of cortisol in and how important it is to have it properly regulated, which is, of course, easier said than done. In terms of stress and mortality, this is kind of a good thing, sort of. So the effects of stress on both mental and physical health are well documented. So they have shown that both mental and physical health can deteriorate as a result of stress. But it actually has mixed results when it comes to actual mortality. So that means you can be really sick, but not necessarily die. So it's more consistent when it comes to health stressors. So anything like smoking or something that we know are absolutely big stressors on our physical health, and you put in the mental, or sort of the fight or flight response into those sorts of things, there is more of a connection to mortality. But it's much less clear when it comes to life events. So by life events, we mean, getting a divorce, the death of a loved one, getting fired, moving across the country, any of those kind of things that are super big stressors as a life event doesn't have a clear relationship with aging us, even though we are going through some of the same processes physically as a result of being stressed. So we're still pumping the high cortisol, we're still going into fight or flight, we're still, anxious, we're still going through all these things. It doesn't seem to have as much of an effect long term when it comes to mortality. And this is because, and they related it to person's ability to cope and their attitude as factors. So even though we go through something like a divorce or we go through the death of a loved one, we all have varying capacities to cope with those and different attitudes that allow us to go on. And by the way, they have linked people who live a very long time, like we're talking people in their 90s or older. One of the things they have attributed to their ability to live such a long life is their ability to cope with loss. Because obviously, when you live to be 99, you outlive a lot of people that you know. So that has actually been something that we've known, that attitude and how you cope with the things you can't control, or even if they're things you can control but you don't like, has a greater effect on your overall ability to maintain your physical health. Now, there's a concept called hormesis. I don't know if you've ever heard it. I heard it originally when I took Fundamentals of Nutrition at the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. It was in our actual fundamentals book, which they don't use anymore. And it basically is a phenomenon in which an adaptive response to low doses of otherwise harmful conditions or substances improves the functional ability of cells and organisms. So in other words, giving a low dose of something that is not good for you actually creates a positive response. And this is the theory of homeopathy is based on this. So if you take belladonna, the plant, it's poisonous. But if you take belladonna, the homeopathic remedy, it actually helps with headaches, for example. So that's what hormesis is. And so they've actually looked at it with regard to stress, and they found that low or more moderate doses of a toxic substance like cortisol, because cortisol can be very toxic at high levels, provides a protective benefit against future exposures to stress. So it's not like we want no stress at all. Limited, small amounts can actually be beneficial. And they called it psychological toughening. So this intermittent exposure to the stress actually allows you to function better. And this makes it very consistent with the definition of hormesis. So this may be due to experiencing this intermittent or moderate amounts of stress is allowing you to cope better physically. So remember, we're still talking about this as a physiological reality. So it actually can help your physical body learn to cope with the stress response better if you have small amounts of stress. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And that's probably good news, because who amongst us doesn't have some stress? We all do, right? And what it also, they speculate, is that it allows people to be more resilient to stress later in life. So that's good. Now, in terms of stress and city living, so I don't know how many of you live in an urban setting, but they basically found that urban living affects two areas of a brain that affect emotion and stress. So this is in comparison to those who live in the country. So the first area is the amygdala, which is involved with emotional regulation and mood, and it showed greater stress response in city dwellers. So that means their emotional state and mood is going to be more volatile, shall we say. They may be more unhappy, they may cry more, they may be angry more, etc. And then the other area was the cingulate cortex, which is in the limbic system, and this is involved with the formation of emotions, processing of emotions, learning, memory. This also showed higher activity in city dwellers. So basically what this means is the stress of living in the city causes much more emotional stress type responses and can affect, concentration and memory and things more than when you live in the country, and may explain why when people leave the city and they go to the country, they all of a sudden relax. I'm not surprised by these findings, but the fact that they've documented some of this, I think, is worth us knowing. Another study found that faced with threat, and I mentioned this previously, people tend to choose the flight response, not the fight response. And when you choose the flight response, you disengage mentally and behaviorally at first, because you're really just, hightailing it out of there. and the brain area that considers the state of others and feelings and intentions actually will become engaged when they decide to flee. So they disengage some aspects, and they are more likely to be focused in this area of the brain where they're thinking about feelings and intentions, and this helps you make the decision to flee. And that ties into that tend and befriend thing that I was talking about earlier. But if the situation is dire enough, then there is a decrease in this area, and the amygdala activity was increased, which means you're going to be more unhappy, more stressed, more panicked as a result, depending on the level of the threat. But you're still not fighting. And then I thought this was also important because they have found a link to stress and early childhood adversity. So a UCLA study found that early life adversity of prior periods of depression make adults more prone to depression from low life stressors. So it has to be often linked to similar experiences. So let's say when you were a child, maybe a parent died and you went through a period of depression. Especially if there was more than one example of this, or this had a very adverse result for you, depending on what other family members you had and such. Then when you're older as an adult, you may react this way and be more prone to depression just from somebody. They don't die, but maybe they're sick, or maybe you're worried about them being sick, or maybe it's yourself or something like that, that you're making a connection between the two types of events. And they also found that it makes people more prone to think negatively about everyday events. So, for example, when a friend does not call you back, you think something is wrong. And I'm sure we've all experienced that, like when you send out an email now and they don't answer your email, and you're like, okay, what did I do? Did I do something? So again, most of us should just go, oh, they must be busy or they missed it, because that's usually the truth. And they really aren't thinking anything about you at all. But this is a way we attach negativity to everyday events. And when we attach negativity to everyday events, we are increasing the stress effect towards those events, because that's just the way our minds work. And then thoughts like this will increase the stress response, as I just mentioned, but it also will include inflammation, which they've linked to depression. And of course, they've also linked that to other health conditions as well. In terms of stress in the gut, the vagus nerve is the main conduit between the brain and the gut. And one study determined that vagal tone, so that's how well your vagus nerve functions, was significant as to whether cortisol and adrenaline were affecting IBS or Crohn's patients. And what they found is adrenaline is more associated with IBS, and cortisol is more associated with Crohn's. So that means if adrenaline is involved, and that makes a lot of sense since the adrenals are located down in that region. And when you secrete adrenaline, you get a lot of butterflies in your stomach and in other areas in the GI tract. So that doesn't surprise me. They also found in both conditions that the inflammatory marker TNF-alpha was also affected by vagal tone. If you're looking for some what do you do about the vagus nerve kind of suggestions, they're actually quite simple. First of all, they found that splashing cold water on your face improves your vagal tone. Humming improves your vagal tone. Meditation, supporting gut bacteria, and slow rhythmic breathing from the diaphragm can also improve your vagal tone. So again, these are simple things that clients can do, and we can easily, help them if we think this would be appropriate for them. Now, in terms of panic symptoms, so most of us think that when we panic, it's acute and it's instant. And what they have found is that's not necessarily the case, that panic symptoms actually increase steadily, not acutely, after the stressful event. So because it doesn't happen acutely, it's going to happen over a period of time after the event. And what people will be experiencing when they have panic symptoms is excess anxiety and adrenaline, and it's occurring randomly. And this is what PTSD is about. So PTSD would be the most extreme version of this, but this can also happen on a milder level with people who are going through stress all the time. They may all of a sudden, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, I certainly have, where I'm minding my own business watching TV and all of a sudden I have a heart palpitation. And it's kind of weird. And it's like, oh, I must have thought of something quickly or briefly that triggered it. So this is what we're talking about. And again, it makes it harder for people to connect the stressor to the event because it's happening after whatever caused them to panic happened. And by the way, because you keep experiencing these symptoms, you're creating a scenario for chronic stress. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that we have to support the body both physiologically and with lifestyle and possibly emotional elements to help people cope better, right? So from a physiological perspective, there's several systems that have to be supported. One, of course, is the brain. One, of course, is the adrenals, the gut, and now we know the nervous system and the liver because they both are involved with cortisol production. So what you want to do is try to create elements that will support all of these areas. From a psychological perspective or emotionally, you've got to look at their coping skills. So depending on what their coping skills are going to play a role in how well they can calm down cortisol and not have it have the physiological effect that we're trying to avoid. You want to look at the history of the stress-related events that they may have been through, because they can be experiencing, a situation where they react more strongly to low-level stressors because of their history of events, or that they are experiencing panic symptoms that are related because of the history of what they've gone through. So this is going to require quite a bit of getting to know them. And again, there's no rush to do this, but it's something to consider the longer you work with them. You want to consider the intensity of whatever their stress-related event is. So let's say they're working at a job that is just putting them through the roof in terms of how much pressure is on them and how much cortisol they're pumping. All of us can experience stress working at some point or another. But there are people out there who are experiencing it day after day after day after day after day. That's going to have a more psychological effect than, as well as the physiological effect, than it would on people who are just sometimes experiencing stress at work, or there's a certain time of the day where they're more stressed than other times of the day. Like, this is all things you have to take into consideration. And then, of course, how often does the stress occur? If it's daily, it's obviously much worse than if it's monthly, or it happens 3 or 4 times a year or something like that. Now, on a lower level of stress, looking at how their day is structured is something that could be very helpful for them, because if you can sort of point out where they're putting more pressure on themselves by taking on too much, or the way they've structured their day doesn't quite manage their time efficiently, this can be really helpful. And a lot of times you can see things that they can't see. And then asking them about the choices that they make. So a lot of people choose to be, I see this, I have a friend who is teaching. And so when she's developing her notes for teaching, she goes through an enormous amount of stress because she gets overly caught up in the details and does way more than she should, and it makes her extremely stressed. And she doesn't actually enjoy the process, even though she really wants to do the teaching. So these, again, are choices that the person is making, and sometimes people don't have a realistic an approach to what they really should be doing. So they're choosing to do too much when it's not being asked of them. It's not being expected of them. And then having them sort of really sit down and logically look at what they need to do. So again, a lot of people could offload some of their workload. Let's talk about somebody who works all day and then they have to come home and do, say, household chores, or they're involved with activities with the kids and doing household chores and cooking, and okay, so they need to look at all of those and say, are any of these things I don't need to do? Can I get someone else to do it? Is that possible, right? Can we eat out 3 times a week, or can we bring home reasonable takeout so I don't have to cook so much? Or can a family member help out with the cooking? Can a family member help out with the laundry? Things like that, so that they aren't taking it all on themselves and causing themselves needless stress. Or just some of these things just not need to be done. It's not that important, they can wait. So just little things like that are ways to help them psychologically and emotionally develop some coping skills that make them less stressed. Okay, so clients really need to recognize signs they are stressed. They need to make decisions as to what they can change, and that's probably one of the biggest things you can help them with. Starting small is best. So I know somebody who really hated their job, and she was actually the client of a colleague, and the colleague had asked me for my opinion because the colleague could see that her digestive symptoms, which is what the client came to her for, were due to the fact that she hates her job, but she was trying to approach it from a hate the job perspective. And I said, no, you got to start much smaller and just give her something she can do that might make her feel better. And I suggested, like, maybe she could go out to, say, on her lunch break, instead of having it in the office like she always did, just go somewhere calm and quiet and enjoy her lunch, and just disconnect. And so she made that suggestion to the client, and the next thing I know, I'm getting an email saying that the client had quit her job, because that little small step gave her a sense of control over her own life, just a little bit. And by being in a calm environment, she was able to think a little more clearly, and come up with some solutions that could work for her better, that's allowed her to quit her job. Now, and that's often what we're trying to help them do, is calm down the thinking so that they can think more clearly, and they'll find the solutions that they need for whatever's causing them so much stress. So you always just want to give them something small, because something big they can't handle. Now, if they're in acute cortisol, high cortisol, deep breathing can help lower that. Meditation can help turn off the stress of the day, so that they can do when they come home, but it can also be something they just enjoy doing. It doesn't have to be some type of formal meditation. They have done studies that found that a vacation has the same effect as meditation. So maybe what you can do is create the concept of a vacation time per day. Like, it could be an hour per day or 2 hours per day where they were doing something that they might do when they're on vacation. And that could have a really positive effect. And of course, encouraging them to have regular vacation is also good as well. And if you do both, it's even better. And then, of course, mindfulness, which a lot of people put in the meditation category, actually can help prevent or limit stress response during the day. So being focused on the activity of the moment instead of thinking. So stress comes from thinking into the future. So if you've learned about mindfulness, you know that what they're trying to do is get you to stop thinking about the future so much and stay focused on what you're doing in the moment. And it actually allows you to focus better, be more creative, do a better job of what you're doing because you're not being distracted. But this can also help keep the cortisol levels lower as well. And they have found out why mindfulness works, or why they think it works. There have been a lot of the studies about meditation, and it has been found to be moderately helpful for health issues. There's been 2 big meta-analysis studies, and that may not sound like an overwhelming endorsement, but this was against a placebo. And we know that in the case of looking at meditation and stress, compared to a placebo, the placebo is always going to have a benefit because of the perception that it's going to help them. So the fact that it was moderately helpful means that it was quite helpful. So, and they included mindfulness in as part of the meditation group when they were looking at these meta-analysis studies. But they found 4 key components that account for its effectiveness. One is how it helps focus attention. One was how it makes the person more aware of their physical body and how they feel. The third was how it helps with the emotional regulation and keeping people calmer, and also they develop a better sense of self. And what they feel this does is help us attend to and deal with the mental and physiological effects of stress in ways that are non-judgmental, because you're staying so focused in the moment. You're not really thinking, about what might, be good or bad or whatever. It's not part of mindfulness. You're just focusing on the moment. So I do think it's a good technique that people can learn. It does take practice, but it's well worth pointing them in that direction. And I know some of you actually have taken mindfulness training, which can be really good, because then you can help them do it. All right, so what can clients do? They can develop what we call emotional fitness, which is the ability to adapt emotionally to any circumstance. And how you react in any given situation depends on the level of awareness. So awareness comes from activity in the prefrontal cortex. So this is where we do our abstract thinking, language, rationality, and higher executive functioning. So if you look at the brain here, that's this section up here at the front. When we're stressed, we're here at the back of the brain and in through here where the amygdala is. So this is fight or flight. This is long-term planning. So stress keeps us out of the prefrontal cortex and keeps us where we make short-term reactions, okay? So a lot of short-term thinking. And emotions often make for short-term solutions, so we often do dumb things when we are thinking from the back part of our brain. Because again, our goal, if you're in fight or flight, is to just end whatever puts you in fight or flight. So you tend to make a lot of bad decisions. So the key is to become aware of this and, try to help people understand that solutions come from the prefrontal cortex. So you can try this exercise for clients. Basically, people need to notice themselves and how they typically react. So that's the first thing, is to make them aware of their reaction level. And then they need to try and distance themselves from the reaction, because it's only through some distance that you actually see when you're acting in a manner that isn't probably going to keep you calm. They need to ask why they feel the way they do and try to figure out why they're reacting the way they are, and then ask if this reaction is necessary. So again, I like to use the example of driving in traffic, right? So you're driving in traffic and somebody does something dumb and you start yelling at them in your car. You're raising your cortisol levels. You're putting yourself in fight or flight. Do you really need to do this? Is the person even hearing you because you're inside your car? Yeah, you can honk your horn, shake your fist, and maybe, give them rude gestures. But what does that do for you? It doesn't do anything for you. And in the bigger picture, as long as you weren't in a car accident, and that's why you went into fight or flight, because there was the perception that perhaps this would cause an accident, and that is an absolute threat, fight or flight need. But you didn't get in the accident, so you should stop yelling at the person from inside your car. So basically what you're asking people to do when they experience, these situations where they feel this way, what's truly important to react to strongly and when it isn't. And most of us react strongly to things that really we don't need to and don't serve us very well. So you want to learn to control immediate emotions, because that means you'll get out of fight or flight. This will put you back into the prefrontal cortex for more long-term problem solving. And problem solving allows for new ideas to help resolve stress-causing issues. So the way to look at it is that you want to physically lower stress through both physiological ways, foods, supplements, etc., psychological lifestyle changes, whatever you can do to get that cortisol level low, so now they are thinking, so now they can think in the prefrontal cortex and then come up with the solutions to remove the stressor permanently. Now, if you want to support the physical body, you need to support the liver. And a liver support is not detoxification. That actually puts more stress on the liver if the liver is not in good shape. So milk thistle, reishi, black cumin seed actually can help repair liver cells. So that's what you're looking at. And then you can support detoxification when their liver functions a little better. You want to support the gut, which could require a more comprehensive protocol. But in the short term, just getting them some prebiotics and probiotics can be very helpful. Blood sugar stabilization is key because they need a steady supply of slowly release carbs. And your gut bacteria, by the way, does help the slow release. This is what's going to prevent their blood sugar from dropping as they're burning sugar when they're stressed. And then you want to support the nervous system and the brain. B vitamins, EFAs can be very helpful. And finally, balance cortisol, which means adaptogens and glandulars. So what's my number one choice for an adaptogen? Well, we got to have something that supports the adrenals, the central nervous system, and the liver, because that's where cortisol is produced. And we also need something that stables blood sugar, because we're burning fat and not sugar. I mean, we're burning sugar, not fat. And we also need to support gut bacteria and lower inflammation. And we need something that protects the brain. And you're probably saying, is there actually something that's an adaptogen that does all that? And the answer is yes. And some of you may know what I'm about to say because you know me and you know what my favorite adaptogen is, but I can't help it. This is why. And of course it is Schisandra. And every time I look at Schisandra and I'm looking at the research, I'm going, I should be taking this. I used to take it all the time. And I go, I should get back to taking it. This stuff is just too good. And there's a lot of research to support this that's been done in Russia and China. So it is a Chinese berry, and it's available as a dried fruit, which you can make as a tea. If you want to put it in a smoothie, I would suggest soaking it first because they're a little too dried to process up nicely. You can also buy it as a dried powder, and you can get organic versions of this and add it to smoothies. It doesn't taste great. It tastes kind of like flowers. But if you mix it in with a bunch of fruits like blueberries and anything with a strong acid taste and a really strong flavor to it, it will cover that and you won't even notice it. I always took the Nature's Way capsules. I found them to be very, very effective. There are other capsules that you can take, or other companies as well. You can also buy it in a tincture. And what you want to avoid is a standardized extract, because this is where they've taken a chemical out of the Schisandra, put it in a capsule or maybe a tincture, and they've left the synergy of the berry behind. And in doing so, they were going to have left behind some of these other benefits that the Schisandra would be able to perform, because it's not one specific chemical that does all of those things that I just mentioned. It's multiple chemicals that are in the berry that allow it to be that beneficial. And this is true for everything. You don't want to do the standardized extracts. You get more from the whole plant. All right, so this is the last slide. And I mentioned this, you know, we have to look at the role that an unhappy life can play in somebody's life with regard to stress. So often for more complicated issues, when they have big health issues, you might want to consider this. So how does the body react when a person is living a life they do not want? This is what we need to think about. Or it could be they're being forced to do something that just doesn't do it for them. This can have an ongoing stress effect that they will never acknowledge because it's so much part of their everyday life, they don't even notice it so much anymore. So we still want to go through the same process of lowering the cortisol to get them to the prefrontal cortex so they can start maybe examining their life and making better decisions. And this is the only way they're going to change that reality. And this is where psychospiritual work might be needed. So this is where, if this is not something you do as a modality, you may want to refer them But it is worth their while to try and examine, and seek out the life they would like to have. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the presentation. And I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to turn on my webcam. Don't turn off the microphone. Okay, so do we have any questions? Marianne says, which EFAs do you suggest? I'm a big fan of getting it through diet. And I'm not really sure why this is not coming back. Turn it off, turn it on. I should be coming back to you. Did I finish? I didn't stop screen share. There I am. Okay. So I like multiple versions of EFAs in the diet. So if they are not vegetarians, then obviously fish-based foods, chia seeds, especially ground, raw nuts and seeds. So I like to get it through diet. If I think they need more 3, then I might recommend a good fish oil. I do like Nordic Naturals is one of my favorites. And I do like cod liver oil because you're also getting the vitamin A and the D as well. Melody saying, how long does someone take Shazana before it feel effect? It should happen relatively within a few weeks. It's really good when the blood sugar swings up and down because that's the one you'll notice the most. And if they are aware of what their blood sugar feels like when it swings up and down, they will notice when it stops. If they're not aware of it, they may find that they are reacting better. They're less likely to, you know how when you lose your temper, you then go and have this debate in your head for like hours and hours and hours. Like that's a sign blood sugar swings up and down if there ever was one. They may notice that goes away. They really need to be aware of symptoms to see what improvement they notice. Marianne asks, do I think MCT oil is helpful? I think it can be helpful, but I think you could also do that with straight coconut oil as well because that has the MCTs in it and it has some other beneficial properties as well, but either one is fine. There's some good research on MCT oil. All right. Any other questions? I know some of you want to go because I went a little longer than I typically do. I don't seem to be able to hit the right mark. Either it's a little short or it's a little long. But there was a lot here. I could have done this in 2 parts, to be perfectly honest. There's so much information with regard to research and cortisol and stress. Any suggestions for supplements for people who insist on staying up late? Oh, because that would be me. Well, my rule of thumb is if I'm up past 1 o'clock, I will take melatonin. My goal is to try to be in bed before then because your melatonin production cycle is between 12 and 2. But when I stay up late, I will do that, but I also take other relaxing, like a relaxing herbal supplement and some magnesium to relax myself. Because what I've noticed is I do experience the lull that I'm supposed to experience later in the day. And then, see, unfortunately, our creativity cycle is between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. And so if I stay up till midnight, all of a sudden I get this burst of creativity and I don't want to go to sleep. So that's what I recommend, some type of relaxation supplement, and of course something to make up for the difference that I'm not producing or may not be producing my own melatonin. I have done it without. I don't notice a big difference, but I'm kind of doing it most on insurance. It's mainly what's going to relax the person so that they go to sleep and sleep well. And then I also make sure everything is quiet. I'm not being disturbed, and I'm in a dark room and I don't have any light coming in. These are all really important factors to get them to sleep deeply. And so even though they're going to be still asleep while it's, daylight, which is not ideal, if they're in a deep sleep, it won't affect them. Maria says, so refreshing, an information-packed webinar that doesn't end with a sales pitch. That's what the educational webinars are for, because it's easier than blogging. Anyway, Julia says, thanks, great information. All right, so Bonnie's saying, very applicable to her clients, including the psychospiritual aspects. I really think it's something we have to consider that quite a bit now. All right, so I'm getting lots of thank you now, which is usually the sign that you are done. Melody's saying, same here, she gets the second wind when she should be going to bed, can't turn the mind off. It's very, very common. And it tears me apart because I want that creativity and I want to stay up. Melanie's saying, for evening routine, what's really helped me is justgetflux.com. Is that the thing that turns the computer light to not be beaming at you those wrong light things that keep you more stimulated? I have that on my computer for sure. Okay, is there anything else? Can you recommend any apps for mindfulness and meditation? I haven't. I looked into doing courses because it's more my cup of tea. I don't actually have any recommendations, but I can ask within the group. Maybe somebody does, and I'll post them on the webpage. Marianne saying insighttimer.com for 1,000 free meditations is what she uses every night. Muna saying, would you suggest to a teenager who is stressed and depressed? You've got to help them get to the bottom of that. And so that takes some time and patience to get them to open up, because a lot of times teenagers are not great at talking to adults, but something's bothering them. So you need to try and get to the bottom of what they're doing, and then see what they're doing nutritionally as well. Melanie says the Flux app takes the blue out of the screens. Yeah, that's what I have on my computer. Marianne says, so Luana is also saying the Insight Timer, she likes it too. Marianne is saying the Headspace app is great. Julia is saying Boudico breathing is incredible and very practical. Sherry is suggesting there are 5-minute mindfulness meditations that are easy for beginners. So go on YouTube and just type in mindfulness. And Bonnie says, I don't use an app, but my favorite meditations are by Jason Stevenson. Jason Stevenson. Love his accent. Maria is recommending the Meditation Oasis podcast. And remember, mindfulness is a training, but meditation can be anything that allows you to relax. So there are formal meditations which some people really like, but it can be just something that you find relaxes you. And so you can vary it to suit your need. Sandra's saying the University of Toronto has a great certificate program in mindfulness meditation. I came across quite a few that I really wanted to take. But I don't like going downtown, so I was looking for something in my neck of the woods. I figure, why put yourself in a stressful situation of driving in traffic to de-stress? Didn't make sense to me. But yeah, there are some great courses, and I also think it's good to get out and be with other people and talk to people who are learning the same thing at the same time. I mean, I like online things. I like apps. I really do. They save me time, but I also appreciate that, we need more human interaction, especially in our own local area. Okay, so if that answers all of your questions, then we can call this done. And I will send out the replay tomorrow, along with any information that is pertinent. And I thank you all for attending. As always, you are a great audience, and you ask great questions and have good comments. Doris is saying courses from Sound True. And Melody is saying, don't forget the benefits of yoga. more physiological benefits to counteract stress. Yes, very important. Exercise, again, even going for walks, anything that is not too high intensity aerobics is really beneficial. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Next, I've actually changed my mind about what I'm doing in October, because I don't know if you attended with David Price Francis back in May, but his new book has come out, and it's the original reason I wanted to have him on a webinar. And now the book has come out, and it's about the 9 different personality types. So I was going to do one on a blood spot test for the gut, but I'm very unhappy with the level or quality of the results they sent. So now I'm going to have to explain to them why they need to tell me more about what the results are before I'll ever talk about it. And so I needed a new topic, and he just contacted me yesterday. So in October on the 17th, the Wednesday, whatever the Wednesday is, I think it's the 17th, we're going to be talking about the 9 different personality types that he writes about in his book. And I'm really excited because this is a lot of fun. So hopefully I will see you next time, and have a good evening.